go to the knock, they go to the door, two Muslim men, don't you think it's time you sold your house? Well, it's not for sale. Well, you're going to have to sell sometime. Well, I wouldn't sell for the 20s and 50s you've got in that carrier bag or that you've got in that briefcase. Well, no white person will buy it from you. That is the phrase that is used. There are no concessions to politically correct language when that happens in England. And it's very upsetting for people. I get pensioners who have worked all their lives, who might have fought in the last war, who have kept their noses clean, and they have hoped for a quiet retirement, and that happens, and it intimidates them. And they say, I suspect it's intended to intimidate. The sums offered, what I have found, tend to vary between a quarter and a half of the market value, somewhere around a third. I was approached recently by a lady on behalf of an older lady who had, she was being harassed, and what she was being offered for her 5-bedroom house was a 1-bedroom flat plus a round-the-world cruise, whatever that meant. And so she would get out of sign over a 5-bedroom house, and she'd end up with a flat, the 1-bedroom flat at the end of it, and she didn't want to go. That is upsetting for people. People should not have to put up with that, and there is no one who will protect them. They go to the police, and the police say, it's just someone offering to buy your house. They go to the local authority, not our business. They know that they have no one to stand up for them, and I can't stand up for them. All I can say is you have to cut your losses and go. We may be able to retake your property in 10 or 15 years' time, but for the moment it's only going to get worse. And there are cases where it does get worse. I haven't seen many of these. Now these stages I'm talking about, they don't happen in all areas, and they don't all happen in the same sequence. But the worst one, the one which drives out even the stoutest hearted people, is the intimidation stage. This is when the diehards leave. Now I call this stage the we have no reason to believe there is any racial element to this crime, madam stage, because that's what the police tell you. And you will notice your car gets vandalised, a window gets broken, something comes through your letterbox, or you find that there are your cables are getting cut, and that and when you go to the police you say, well, this isn't happening to the Muslim-owned properties down the street. I think there is a purpose to this. And the response you get is, we don't think there's anything racial about this crime, madam. It's just ordinary crime. We'll report it. Go home. Again, that old lady, or the lady who came to me reporting the case of the old lady recently, she was getting her TV cable cut. She'd spent 40 quid to get it reconnected. It would get cut again. When I spoke to that lady, apparently it had happened 3 times in recent weeks. Her gate had been knocked off, her gate post had been knocked over, a window broken, stuff through her letterbox. And that was, maybe it had nothing to do with the offer to purchase her house, to take her house in return for a 1-bedroom flat and a round-the-world cruise. But maybe it was connected. But the police, I'm told, didn't want to know. Now, that is unfair. That is wrong. That is what we have found happens in these neighbourhoods. And people know this, people are aware of this. They don't get it from their political leaders. They don't get it from the mainstream media. They get it from each other. People talk. You cannot, however repressive you are, however much the authorities try to shut people up, you will not stop people talking in the pub. You will not stop people talking to each other in their living rooms, on the telephone, and word will go around. And that is why, when there is a proposal for a mosque in people's area, in someone's neighbourhood, those people want help and they come to us, and that's when we get involved. We don't foist ourselves on other people. We don't go to them saying, you must not allow a mosque here, you've got a duty to us to stop it. We let them come to us, and they do. And I can tell you they are only too keen to receive a little bit of help in order to be able to have their say. Now this is going to get resolved one way or another. Problems like this don't stay unresolved forever, and that is why the problem needs to be confronted sooner rather than later. Now I'll deal a little bit with Quranic doctrine. The Quran calls 3 times, the Quran alone, forgetting about the more violent hadith and the seerah, the Quran calls 3 times for unbelievers to be killed wherever they are found. Now that is your context right there, wherever they are found. It calls 14 times, it sanctions 14 times the taking of unbelievers as slaves, in usually sexual slaves taken in war. war booty. That's 14 times, those whom your right hands possess. Now, that is not a prisoner of war, that is not a paid servant, that is someone you possess, someone your right hands possess. Now, that is not a matter of religious freedom, that is a matter of public order, basic public order. You can't allow that kind of incitement to go on, to continue unchecked. If you do, you are going to find that public order problems ensue. And without public order, all your other panoply of rights, of human rights, don't really have a foundation. We've understood that for centuries. Magna Carta, common law, the Bill of Rights, the Declaration of Independence, the American Constitution, these all have as their underpinning, their legal underpinning, this concept of the peace, the king's peace, order, public order. Without that, your other rights don't mean very much. I mean, try going to Somalia, try going to Syria today, try going to Yemen and insisting on your right to sexual preference. It's a nonsense because you won't get anywhere. There's no one to enforce that right. Try insisting on your right to religious freedom in those countries. You'd be a braver man than me if you would, and there's nowhere to enforce it because there isn't the basic civil order there in order to enforce those rights. Now, that needs to be addressed because otherwise, what we have seen is a stark and deep division arising, and divisions like that get resolved. Now, what is the nature of that division? I want to talk to you about what it is in England. I'll talk first of all about British attitudes. And what we have seen in Britain, and this was referred to by the British faith minister. This is the, and now pity any country that has to have a faith minister, okay? I think we know what that means. Now, this lady is an unelected ex-businesswoman who's been put in the House of Lords and then made this minister, Saida Wasi, and she was decrying a national opinion poll, a Mori poll, which showed that just 24% of British people think Islam is compatible with being British. Okay, only 24% think it is compatible. Only 23% were reported to say that Islam is not a threat to Western civilization. Now, don't get angry about that. Take a step back, look at it coldly, look at it dispassionately. What does that mean? What does that bode for the future? Well, let us look at the other side. Let us look at Muslim attitudes. Now, these have been polled many, many times, and I can only give you a few. I've got pages of them here, but I'll give you a few. In 2007, the Guardian newspaper, which is the broadsheet of every right-thinking, multicultural PC liberal, they found that 0% of British Muslims found homosexuality acceptable. So that's not that 0% were admitted to being gay. That's not that 0% thought they didn't like it very much or weren't really very receptive to it. That's 0% thought it was, quote, acceptable. Now, 40% of British Muslims were found to want Sharia law in the UK. That was a 2006 study. In 2007, 36% of British Muslims were found to think that apostates should be killed. Okay, I remember that quote I gave you previously about being nailed onto the wood and left for 3 days. 36% want apostates killed. 24% of British Muslims were found 1 year after the tube bombings, the London tube bombings, which killed over 50 people. 24% were found to have agreed or to tend to agree that those bombings were justified, okay? Justified. Not understandable, not that you can sympathise with the motivation, but justified. Now, in another poll, exactly the same percentage, 24%, believed that the British government had carried out those bombings. Okay. Now, my point here is not to stir you up, not to make you angry, but to show the depth of the division. That division is severe, and divisions like that don't go on forever. There is no way to reconcile such opposing views. It's a fool's errand to try to reconcile them. There's no polity that can reconcile such attitudes. There's no political philosophy, even in theory, that can do so. There is no common denominator. And that means that those two attitudes will separate as they are separating. We're seeing that in Britain. We're seeing de facto Islamic areas, and they are moving towards becoming official, or what a lawyer would say, de jure Islamic areas, areas that are known to be Islamic areas. I don't know if you go onto YouTube and you look for, you put in Islamic patrols, you'll find the one recently is quite shocking. If you're carrying a beer can, wearing a skirt, look as though you may be gay, then you are given some intimidation by some Islamic thugs and told to get out of the area. But there are others as well. The more common type that does not get reported on, or certainly not reported on like that, is where Muslim men go around an area trying to eradicate prostitution from that area. Now, my sense on seeing those is that that is not about prostitution, that is about muscle flexing. That is people saying, we oppose prostitution. That is not people saying we are patrolling because we oppose prostitution. That is people saying they oppose prostitution because they want to patrol. Do you understand? It's claiming an area. It's territorial. Now, we're going to see more such things. And if you don't have to take my word for that. Look at the Daily Telegraph report from, I think, 2 days ago by a scrupulously multicultural and politically correct chairman of the Quilliam Foundation. He was a former leadership member of a global Islamist group, not quite sure what that is, but he now has a job as a moderate preaching against Islamism. And his quote, this gentleman, Majid Nawaz, he said, Muslim patrols could become a lot more dangerous and perhaps willing to maim or kill if they are joined by battle-hardened jihadis. And he said they were imitating Hitler's brown shirts by enforcing with threats and violence their version of the law in neighbourhoods. And that's the way he put it, imitating Hitler's brown shirts, enforcing with threats. Now, that is a sign of separation. That is a mark of separation. And those areas are not going to become less Islamic as a result of this. And how do you stop those areas from separating out? If that continues, I do not see how you prevent these areas becoming fully fledged, acknowledged Islamic areas. And if they are declared to be so, immune or outside of democratic law, subject to their own version of Sharia law, how do you then stop the rest of society saying, if you're not prepared to live under democratic law, then you shouldn't vote to influence it? You can't stop that. One will follow from another. And then how do you then say that those areas are part of Britain? I don't know how you do, because if you have areas that are not subject to British democratic law and which are then rightly or wrongly prevented, I'm not saying this should happen, but I'm asking how you prevent it, because I don't see a way to prevent that, then and they are not able to vote to influence that law, effectively they are outside of Britain. They're not really part of Britain anymore. I don't see how you can say they are, but you can't grant them UDI, independence. It's not like Scotland or Wales. You can't draw a line and say, okay, you go your way, we'll go our way, because they're dotted around the country like holes in a Swiss cheese. Only there'll be holes in the democratic edifice. And I don't have to tell you how dangerous that is. I don't think that democracy can survive that kind of fracture and fragmentation. I think that is I think that is a potentially lethal threat to democratic rule. I don't see how it survives that. And that's why it's important to prevent the enlargement of those Islamic areas in England, anyway, now, by trying to contain them, to keep them a little smaller, so that if that happens, you can contain and control the problem in humane, lawful and orderly ways. That is what is necessary. If you try to repress responsible and humane people like me and try to prevent people like me from talking, you don't accomplish the fact that no one talks about it. What happens is it then gets talked about in inhumane, irresponsible and disorderly ways. And that is why it's necessary to take action now, to try to contain the problem while we can, so we can deal with it in a peaceable way. Now, if we don't address this problem now, that is what I want to look at as the fifth point. And in doing so, I want to look at the background to this problem, because the background to this problem is what makes it so potentially dangerous in England, in Britain and Europe. Now, before I do that, I want, again, I keep stressing it, look at it in a detached way. Try to abandon your sense, any sense of anger that you might have about this issue, and particularly any sense of hatred. Now, this is a problem. When you get the censorship fascists, when you get the free speech chillers going around saying you can't say this, you can't say that, it makes it very difficult for people like me to say things they might agree with, because they'll immediately jump up and say he's only saying that because we forced him to. It's a victory for us. No. I am saying here, what I'm saying because I believe it, and that is you should not succumb to hatred. You should not succumb to anger. There is nothing that you can do that will go better if you add a dash of hatred to it. And it's important to realise that, because there are a lot of people who say, I don't hate Muslims, I only hate Islam. No, that doesn't work either. Hatred is just not acceptable, full stop. It doesn't help, it doesn't work. The reason I keep going on about that is that there's a lot of psychobabble about how you use your anger, you focus your hatred. It's drivel. If your only reason for doing something is hatred, then you shouldn't be doing it. If that's the only thing that motivates you, then you don't have a motivation. Do it because you love your country, or do it because you love freedom, or do it because you value the contribution that your country has made to the world, as I do with my country, England, Britain. I value that contribution. I don't want to see that light go out, and if I have anything to do with it, it won't. But don't do it because you hate people. And one thing you can guarantee is, if you get involved, if you do this on the basis, if you try to resist the expansion of Islam out of hatred, you are probably the sort of person who will end up persecuting Jews, and that is totally unacceptable. Now, this is so important because the background is potentially, it seems to me, explosive. That might seem a very strong word. I'll explain what I mean by that. The three things in the backdrop that we have in Europe are fiscal breakdown, fiscal collapse, welfare breakdown, and the anger, the public anger that will result from that, and finally the problem of European history. And if I go through those in order. Fiscal collapse. Now, fiscal collapse, we are broke many times over in Britain and in Europe. Read a newspaper, look at the business pages. You don't have to be a genius to find that out. When I counted in 2009, based on government statistics, I stopped when I got to total liabilities of between 5 and 6 times our annual income in Britain. Okay, 5 or 6 times GDP is what our government owes, either in direct debts or in welfare obligations. That's without counting the guarantees that have been given to banks. Now, the Money Week magazine recently said that Britain was between 9 and 10 times GDP in the whole, between 9 and 10 times annual income. Now, put that in context. Imagine you go into your bank manager's office and you say, I want a loan, please. And he says, well, what are your circumstances? And you say, well, I've got nothing. I've got a load of debts, though, all wrapped up on my credit card. And I'm paying out a lot of money to my cousins and uncles and aunts and grandparents. And it comes to about between 5 and 10 times my annual salary. And there's a guarantee that I've given to the local credit union. And that's 5 or 10 times my annual salary. Your bank manager will kick you out of his office in no seconds flat. Now that is the situation that we're in. I don't think there's any way to recover from that. Now that is a problem, because when states go bust, the reach of their law becomes very short or non-existent. Look at Argentina 10 years ago. That is a problem. It becomes lawless. When you have lawlessness, you will then get ambitious and ruthless forces filling that vacuum, very happy to be sucked into that vacuum. And that is a problem. And it's particularly a problem in light of the second thing, which is welfare collapse. Now that follows from fiscal collapse. And I hate to be the one to break it to you. I hate to be the one to break it to my fellow citizens, because a lot of other English people don't really realise this, but if government goes broke, it can't pay welfare. If it hasn't got any money, it can't pay any money out. And that's a problem, because so many welfare dependence is very widespread in Europe. The figures that I've read are that the households to whom welfare is distributed, it's distributed on the basis of households in general, that 40% of them receive means-tested benefits. That's generally dole and housing benefit. 30% receive them as their main source of income. Now, I'm not here to say whether welfare is a good or bad thing, but if that suddenly stops, if the rug is ripped out from underneath, how do you think these people are going to feel? They're going to be happy about it? Are they going to look for someone to blame? Are they going to be angry? Public anger is like lightning. It will look for the thing closest to hand to discharge itself on. You can see that throughout history. You can certainly see that throughout European history, which is the third thing. Look at European history. It is not a particularly peaceful place. It does have a tendency to resort to disorder at the very least when it feels threatened, when its economy collapses. What do countries do when their economies collapse? I don't have to go through the litany of atrocities that have occurred in Europe. You probably can all think of some immediately. Now, if you don't address this problem, or if we don't address this problem soon, our options for dealing with it in a lawful and humane way will be so limited. I wouldn't bet on them at all. And that's why I think it is important to do something, to try and do my little bit now. Our politicians don't want to know about it. They won't. They want to repress anyone who mentions it. I can understand why. It rocks the boat. But if you harry and repress people like me, you just ensure that worse people than me are dealing with it. Now, you may not like me, you may not agree with me, but you don't want worse people than me coming up to deal with it, because I want this dealt with in a humane, consensual way. I cannot think of a more reckless approach than that which our authorities are taking, and that is my motivation. I am English. I have benefited from a long history of gentle restraint in my own country. That has helped me to be what I am today. I have enjoyed that. What I find unbearable, what I'm not prepared to sit by and watch, is that gentle and noble history of restraint being trashed by, and my generation being the generation that trashes it. I won't sit by and do that. I will do something about it, and I don't particularly care if people don't like it, and I know what they might try and do to me, but I will do my duty there, and I don't care how contemptible and old-fashioned that sounds. I will do it. Now, if that may lead you to say, well, what can we do? What can we as Canadians do? And you may be surprised about this. I'm optimistic for my own country. I think we will win. I don't think there's any way that we won't win in my country. The problem is we might disgrace ourselves in the process. I think some European countries will. They periodically do disgrace themselves. Unfortunately, I think we have a chance not to, because of our history, because of our slightly better political habits. But for you, I think in Canada, you have better prospects. I think you are going to stay afloat. I don't think the things that I've outlined here apply to you. I don't think you will crash. I don't think you will collapse. You have been better led economically than we have, so that if things come to the crunch, I think you will still have the structures in place. You will still have the leadership and the law in place to be able to deal with situations. And my advice to you, you might be surprised, is watch and learn. We may have to fight the battle on my side of the world. I don't think you will have to do it. Okay? I think you can watch and learn. Keep a clear head. In particular, when opinion flips, and when it flips, and I expect it will flip quite fast over the other side of the world, I think you will find opinion changes rapidly here. And that is when you will be able to do something. And I think you will still have the decent, orderly mechanisms to do it. In the meantime, you need to learn. You need to watch the situation. You need to keep an open mind. You should not be snowed over by politically correct talk. You shouldn't be fobbed off. I can't think of anything better that you could do other than joining Act for Canada. It is a really super organisation. It will help you to learn. It will help you to find out. It will help you to make whatever little contribution you want to make. And I wish we had had an Act for Canada organisation in Britain 5 or 10 years ago when we were in the position that you're in now. I wish we had an Act for Canada organisation in Britain today when we're in the position we're in today, but we don't. You do. And that is the sort of thing that I would advise you to do. And watch and learn. Wait for opinion. Try to change opinion, and also wait for it to change. It will. it will. When am I talking about? When do I think this is likely to happen? Well, oddly, I think that the trigger for all of this is not really going to be anything. The immediate trigger, the proximate cause, if you like, will not be about Islam or about us. It will be about economics. This is on my side of the world. I suspect that the point at which societies become ungovernable, and this is the evidence from the fall of the Soviet Union, from Latin American dictatorships, and also from the French Revolution. It's actually quite interesting to see the patterns. When a government annual deficit reaches 20% of GDP, that is when a society becomes ungovernable. Okay, that is when it becomes ungovernable, and we are not there yet. Thankfully, we're not there yet. In Britain, deficits are about between 8 and 10%. It will take another credit crunch, another 2008 crunch, for us to reach that point. But I suspect we will reach that. We get crunches every 8 to 10 years, 1980, 1990, 2000, 2008. When the next one comes, I think it will push us, Britain, over that 20% deficit limit. And it's easy to see why things do collapse, because when a government owes 20% of its GDP every year, when its deficit is that high, not even the window cleaner won't clean your windows on credit, because he knows you're going broke and you can't pay it. Government, its bond market collapses, its finances break down, and that's when you get a wider collapse of law. And I think at that point, if the cycle continues, that's probably going to be towards the end of this decade. That's what we're looking at. That's how many more years we have to keep ourselves going. Now, what are we doing in our country in the meantime? How do we win? What do we do? Well, I'll tell you about what we do, what Law and Freedom does, when we are dealing with mosque planning applications. First of all, we do three things: intel, raising awareness, and council meetings. Now, the first thing, what helps us to win is to find out what's going on. What we do is we go to local authority websites, local authority offices, and we look for applications that have been submitted. You would think it's deadly dull, and well, actually it's quite interesting. What's interesting is that you never see a mosque application applied for as a mosque, very seldom, unless it's a really huge great mosque that can't avoid the label. It's always a community centre, a welfare institute, a cultural institute, or at most a prayer facility. And you get a nose for something that sounds a bit suspicious, and it's quite easy to spot, because only a mosque calls itself a community centre or community and welfare centre for the benefit of the whole community, serving all faiths and ethnicities, for the regeneration of Loamshire High Street, those fancy titles. Nothing else calls itself, in my country, nothing else calls itself a community centre for the benefit of the whole community, serving all faiths and ethnicities. I mean, if it did, it would call itself a pub, okay? It doesn't, you don't get, and you know what that is, and you feel like Hercule Poirot. You've sleuthed out something that's trying to hide, and the mechanisms that are used to try and conceal the intention or the intended use. That is quite interesting. It's kind of entertaining. But when you found them, you will find, or we find, people come to us saying, "Can you help us? Will you help us to register our concerns about this?" And what we then do is to raise awareness. Raise the money to raise awareness, that's the hard bit, that's the unpalatable but critical bit, and then inform local people. And what we found is local people want to know. They want to be told, they want to be helped. They want to know, what will it mean for their neighbourhood? What will the effects be? How can they object? Where do they object? Who do they object to? How to focus, what relevant planning matters to focus on? How not to get dismissed as a bunch of lower class pie eaters, which is what they are commonly. Local authority officers often want to dismiss them as that. How to use the consultation procedure that has been given to them. Make it easy for them to register their concerns, and crucially, let them know they can win. People feel so beaten down with politically correct language. They're scared. They are scared that if they write to the local authority to register their concerns, they will be, quotes, done for racism. They say that to me. They really think they're going to get prosecuted and slung in jail because they say, actually, I don't want planning permission for this to be granted. You have to let them know that's not going to happen, and you can win. And when people realise that, then they are only too happy to register their objections. And that is when you win. And the reason you do is because you are able to fix the political authorities with responsibility. Now, I don't want to be rude about Canadian politicians. They might be very good. I want to be rude about English politicians. They are very cowardly and opportunistic. That is the common characteristic for most of those politicians. That is why we've always lost. These neighbourhoods always lose. We find when we're not involved, it nearly always goes the other way. Planning permission gets granted. These local authorities want to pass these planning permissions on the quiet. They want to do it on the quiet. I say that they are, the way I describe them is they are like a vicar passing gas at high tea. That's how they try to pass these applications, and we won't let them do it. We let them know you are responsible for your decisions. You may find yourselves held to account one day. If you do something that contravenes the law, in particular, if you do something which at a later stage is found to have contravened the law, when a rational and realistic understanding of the nature of Islamic doctrine prevails, when law is interpreted in that light, you might find yourselves answering some very difficult questions. And believe me, don't believe that your politicians don't know what is going on. My mum chaired a planning committee. My granddad chaired it before her. And they were councillors. And if a car went down the road, a little car poodling along, she'd say, "Oh, that's Mr. Robinson." I had no idea, but she would know who it was in every car. She could knock on pretty much every door in her ward and get invited in for food. She probably wouldn't have had to cook while she was a councillor. And so she knew what was going on. Don't believe it when your politicians say, "Oh, I don't know that's happening. Oh, what a surprise." They know what's going on. And part of the game is, it's like a game of bluff, with them pretending they don't know what's going on, and me saying, "I'm not going to let you pretend you don't know what's going on." And you can feel the crunch point where they say, "Oh, well, all right, yes, I do understand, I know what's going on. I think we'd better take these concerns into account." And you do that by fixing responsibility on them, particularly in the council meeting. You let them know that they are on the hook for their decisions. And they will see reason. They will see sense then. They know where this is heading. I have been offered the chance to be a councillor. I have had councillors come up to me and say, "Oh, why don't you be a councillor?" Twice this has happened. And both times what they've said to me is, they haven't said, "It's a great opportunity to do your duty by your local neighbourhood," or "It's a way to serve your country." They say, "You get 13 grand a year." Now, if that tells you something, not everything, but something about the calibre of some of those individuals. And you have to be relentless. You don't let them get away with it. Now, if you do that, we find when we do that, we win. We have won in the past and we will continue to win. I think our success rate is about 94%, which is pretty good. I'm not sure of any other area of law where someone has that success rate. Possibly some people do, but maybe there are people advertising that around your town who say they do, but I'm not aware of it. Now, that is going to continue, and I will come back and tell you about it further if I'm invited, if your authorities will allow you, if they're not going to sling me in jail for it. Now, believe me, when we started this, we knew what we were in store for, and I want to pay tribute to my colleagues, N and T. They know who they are. I'm not going to name them, don't want to put them in danger, but I want to say thank you to them. They knew, we knew what we were in for. Thuggish theocrats, opportunistic politicians, pseudo-radicals sucking up to orthodox opinion. We're under no illusions about what might happen to us, but you should not think, no one should think that that will stop us doing our duty, that will stop us in any way. No one should think that that will stop us from winning, because we do win and that will continue. Thank you very much. Thank you.